So this video I'm going to show a little bit about the method that I use for making bread, and you can see the things that you need there, the basic ingredients. Here's the sourdough starter. I just took it out of the refrigerator so it's pretty cold. Add a little bit of water to it, mix it up really well, and try and scrape it around the sides so that it's well incorporated. Add some rye flour, 20 grams to the 40 grams of water that was just added. We're also going to put in 20 grams of wheat flour as well. So it's a 1-to-1 hydration ratio. Stir it up really well. Make sure that there's no pockets of water or dried unincorporated flour. So we're taking the total amount of flour up to 40 grams to accompany the 40 grams of water. Now it's still pretty cold, so I'm going to leave it out overnight. Try and just slowly get that starter acclimated again. Leave it on the counter 6 to 10 hours and it'll be active. After 6 to 10 hours, I'm going to get 40 grams of water and warm it up, maybe around 110 degrees Fahrenheit or so. And you can see if you've got a digital thermometer, it's a pretty convenient tool because temperature is kind of like an ingredient with sourdough bread. So 40 grams of warm water, mix it in really well. Again, 20 grams of the rye flour, 20 grams of wheat flour. Stir it really well. You need to make sure it's nicely mixed. So I'd just done the 20 grams of rye before, now I'm doing the 20 grams of wheat. So now, since the starter came out of the fridge, we've added a total of 80 grams of water and 80 grams of flour. And so now we've added 160 grams of total mass to the 40 that was there originally. And we'll let this sit and get more active during the next phase, which is going to be autolysing the white flour. I'm just going to set it next to the fridge because that's kind of a warm area in my house. So now I'm adding 445 grams of water to the container. I'm going to microwave it to warm it up a little bit. Kind of the target temperature I like for the mixture of flour and water is 75 degrees. So if the water is a little bit warmer, that's okay because the flour is kind of cool. So I'm adding the 445 grams of water, and now mix in the 700 grams of white flour. And now the Autolyse is just an attempt to get the flour wet, but not necessarily start to mix it. So we're not trying to develop any gluten or elasticity. We're just trying to mix the water around and incorporate it so it's in contact with the flour. So you can see I'm just kind of stirring it around with this knife, getting it everywhere around the bowl, making sure that none of the flour sticks to the bottom there. And the purpose here is just to increase the strength. So just get it to be a lot more firm and elastic later on when we do eventually mix it. Alright, adding some water to the rim of the bowl makes the plastic stick a little bit more easily. And so we're going to cover it with plastic so that it doesn't dry out, and then just let the wet flour sit for 30 minutes to 3 hours. I've read that there's no upper limit to how long you can let it autolyse, but it'll get kind of clumpy the longer you leave it. So the starter is nice and active. You can see the gas bubbles there. You'll notice that the white flour looks a lot different than when we started the autolyse. So that moisture has moved all the way through it. And then the bulk temperature there is below 75, and that's important because any warmer than 75, and I'm not happy with how the dough mixes. I think it kind of gets too sticky and it doesn't develop strength. So I'm adding the 18 grams of salt there and 160 grams of starter. cap up the starter, put it in the fridge, and save it for next time. Alright, if you don't have a stand mixer, of course you can do this part by hand, but the stand mixer does make things a little bit easier. So I'm going to stop this periodically and just show you some of the indicators that I look for in knowing how long to mix it. When I first started baking, I wouldn't mix it up enough. So we're looking for a balance between elasticity and smooth dough. So the dough there is still too shaggy. You can tell it's kind of got clumps. It doesn't look smooth yet. So just have it go a little bit longer. I like to mix it at a variety of different speeds. Sometimes I'll put it on the low, sometimes I'll put it on the high, just so that the dough gets mixed in different spots and at different rates. It's still a little bit too shaggy there. You can see some clumps, so I'll mix it a bit further. This has been sped up. That's not how fast I do it. Okay, now it's getting a lot more smooth. You can see that it's less shaggy than it was before. Just give it a little bit more. The dough is really sticking to the hook, and that's an indication that the gluten is well developed and it's got a lot of strength there. And I let it autolyse for a good long time, and so it's still kind of a little bit lumpy. That's alright. It's not going to stick to my hands because it's got pretty good strength, but I get them wet anyways. Just anytime I handle the dough, I like to get my hands wet just to prevent it from sticking to my hands. Put the plastic on again just so it doesn't dry out. Now we're going to start the bulk fermentation. First hour, I just set it somewhere warm next to the fridge. And an hour later, it really hasn't started to puff up in it at all. But this is our first time to fold and stretch. So I'll use the dough scraper, get it out of the bowl, stretch it out. And this is just because as it's fermenting, the dough will relax. And we can't let it relax. We have to keep that gluten developed and getting stronger and more elastic. So just stretch it out in a couple of different directions, fold it under itself, and pop it back into the bowl. And put the plastic back on so it doesn't dry out. Give it a little more time. So it's only been bulk fermenting for an hour. Set it next to the fridge. Make sure that it's staying in the 75 to maybe 80 degree range. It feels a little bit warmer here, and it is starting to expand. You can tell that it's fermenting and that there's some gas bubbles in there, so the volume's increasing a little bit, but it still has, this particular dough had plenty of strength. Even still, sometimes it really relaxes and you can feel it. Just set it back down in there, cover it with plastic again, give it some more time. Maybe another hour, hour and a half later, it is starting to get up even more. Just stretch it out again. There's no exact number of how many times you should stretch and fold, just like there's no exact duration for how long it should ferment. It all depends on the temperature and how active your starter was. So I try not to worry about being too prescriptive or dogmatic. I just kind of, over time, will get a sense for what it's supposed to look like, what it's supposed to feel like. There's lots of flexibility in amounts and durations and times. To some extent, temperature. So here I'm stretching it again, just one last time. I'll get some flour on the table, and now I'm going to shape it into the dough ball for our final proofing. I'm going to get this parchment paper in the bowl because it's a really nice way to get it out of the bowl and into the hot cast iron bowl that I bake it in. So I'll get that ready so that when the dough is shaped, it's ready to go into the proofing bowl. And that scraping tool can help get your hands and just kind of push the dough underneath. We're trying to get it so that it's like a nice smooth ball. You can see some of the gas bubbles are coming to the surface there. Just pushing it around from all directions, trying to tuck it down under. Alright, then we can move it up into the parchment paper lined bowl. I'll put some plastic on top there along with a rubber band, keep everything in place, make sure that it's all securely covered and it's not going to dry out. And then I'll just leave it for a little while. Now you can see it's expanded a little bit. It's just barely in contact with the plastic. Now the size of your bowl is going to vary how high it gets, but I just kind of over time have learned what it looks like when it's proofed long enough. You can put it in the fridge if you want to cool it down and develop a little more flavor. I'm in a rush, so I'm going to go ahead and bake it. I've preheated my oven to 475 and get the bowl, the cast iron bowl is in there too, also preheating. So I'm going to slash the top of it, which helps the dough to spring when you put it in the oven. Also makes a nice pattern. So that bowl's hot, you got to be careful. I've got my heating pads and I'm just going to lift the dough and paper down into the hot cast iron Dutch oven bowl and pop it back into the oven. So the oven's been preheating at 475, but I'm going to bake it at 450 and set a timer for myself for 20 minutes. And then after that, I'll take the temperature down to 425 and get another 28 minutes. So it's a total 48-minute bake at 2 different temperatures, the higher to help it spring at the beginning. And it's always kind of exciting to take that pan off the lid and see what we got underneath there. Beautiful. You see those circular patterns are because of the top of the bowl also has some circular patterns, and it radiates a little extra heat, and kind of, as long as the dough is high enough, gives it that nice pattern. So there it is, sourdough bread. It turned out okay. Gotta let it cool off, otherwise if you cut it while it's still warm you're gonna lose a lot of moisture and it'll get stale. So after a little bit, after it's cooled off, we'll cut into it and see what it looks like from a side view. Alright, so you know, not as open a crumb as I'd like, but that'll make for some good toast and good sandwiches. The smell is great.